Good afternoon, Dan. You're silent. I was talking to someone.
I'll be down on that.
Mhm. Dan, you're silent.
Hi.
Right.
Is my sound okay, John?
Good.
Okay.
I'm there. Thank you. How are you?
Thank
Great,
God.
Dan.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
I
I
bet you
heard
don't
you.
have I bet you don't have the weather we have.
Probably not. No,
It's not snowing in Jerusalem.
hard to believe. I'm actually in Modi'in, but no, it's not snowing as it is.
Yeah.
You getting a lot of snow?
Not a lot, but today should be a few inches.
Yeah.
All right.
Same here in
So-
Connecticut.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. Dan, I heard you on the radio on ERS on Sunday, Chagiga.
Right. I'm trying to remember what I talked about. No, not volunteering. I don't. I'm working on the next few weeks, so I don't remember. Oh, my granddaughter, the IDF, her letter she
Right.
got.
That's right. The
yeah,
letter she got, she's 16
Yeah.
and she's so proud of it. Yeah.
Yeah. She's going for some testing. I don't think she's going to end up in the IDF, but I'm sure she'll do Sheirut Leumi. But
Yeah, you
she wants
mentioned
to,
that.
as she says, she'll probably explore all her options, and good for her.
Mhm.
Her
Yes.
younger sister, I would not put it past her. I bet you she'll end up in the army in a few years.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I'm proud of them. It's
Yes,
very nice.
Absolutely, Dan.
Very
They're
nice.
Zionists. Yeah.
Yeah, but they are. It's getting tougher to be that these days.
Yeah. Well, the more
Just
reason we have
had
to
it.
stick to it.
Yeah, they just had another barrage of rockets. It's hard to believe.
Ah,
With all the fighting, everything that's gone on in the fighting in Gaza, that they're able to launch 50 more rockets today at Netivot. Like, where's it coming from? I don't understand.
Iran.
No, and even Renana.
But it's not being sent from there. But
No. That's where it's
with
hit.
all the damage that's gone on in Gaza, they still have the capability of launching rockets.
Correct.
It's scary.
Yeah.
Scary stuff.
Our own Laser Berman was on the Times of Israel podcast this morning to try and explain an answer to that question. And the gist of it, it's worth listening to because he's a local hero. But he says that they have an underground city with so many stockpiles that are so far underground, and that they're continuing to dig tunnels, that there are new tunnels popping up even now. So like they have been preparing for this for over a decade. And so they said the IDF has been unable to map out the underground city in southern Gaza of tunnels. And there's still machinery they have there, which is creating new tunnels. So because the
Hard
IDF
to believe.
it's hard to believe. Yeah.
It is indeed. And the issue too is, and I speak with friends who are saying, they continue fighting and more Gazans are being killed. And I said, but they're still launching rockets. And they say to me, but I haven't heard anything about that. Where in the news would you hear that they're still, except for the Israeli news, we even know that took place today. And I wish Israel, as everybody always has said, they could do a better job of trying to justify why they're still there and what's going on.
Well, they're doing that at the UN Criminal Court.
Yes,
I listened to the testimony. It's like, it's so ridiculous that they have to actually expend efforts to defend themselves against this ridiculous South African charge when they should be putting all of the efforts into finding in these tunnels and into fighting. And it's like, okay, yeah, you could fight, but with your hands tied behind your back.
Yeah, right. They don't usually respond to these kinds of accusations, but this was
But they had
important
to
enough
testify.
to do it.
I
Absolutely.
listened to the test. I was listening to the testimony yesterday. It was like, I can't imagine what the justices, what everybody else there were thinking. Were their ears closed? with their brains closed?
Well,
I
when
can't
you're
imagine.
anti-Semitism makes it very hard to hear. It's a
Yeah.
fact. Rabbi, I just want to mention last week, I was hoping that all 4 of the Benot Sherut Lumi girls would have been present at the same time. They did eventually show up. You saw Shira from last year, and
Yep.
Hodaya from last year came. And then I had Hodaya and Adi from 3 years ago. They all made it, so we all had a nice evening together. Unfortunately, it wasn't at the time I was hoping, but
No
next
worries.
time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you've kept those relationships strong. It's so sweet that that's happening still. All of them get sort of confused in my mind about what years they came.
I'm sure.
So
But,
it's sort of
they're
just
good
like,
kids. They're good kids.
yeah, it's nice
Good
to
to
hear
see.
them moving on and getting educations and getting married and having kids and all that.
We're waiting for them to get married. I would like to start, a new round of weddings. Although I went to one of Heshy and Ellen's granddaughters when I was here, but
Yeah,
waiting for some of our own girls.
right. Well, we have a great group here this year, and they're doing a falafel night on Thursday night. Have you heard of this, like the falafel of dogu, or I'm forgetting the name. It's a pop culture phenomena in Israel of
It's Dogo, Dogo.
okay, where this survivor of the Holocaust pledged on the day that he was liberated that he would eat falafel every year on that day for the rest of his life, as sort of a testament to his belief in, in Israel and Israeli cuisine, and it sort of spread, and he recently passed away, and January 18th every year is devoted to that. So Benot this year are offering a falafel night on Thursday night for that purpose. So everyone's invited. Dan, you'll have to have the authentic falafel on our behalf.
I'll make sure that I do that. Yeah.
When are you returning? Remind me.
Sunday.
Okay.
This Sunday.
Great. So I'll talk to you offline about a few things in preparation for your return.
Preparation. I don't need a parade. All right. Just let the record reflect.
Well, I hope everyone's appreciating the winter wonderland out there, except for Dan. It's really coming down in Sharon here, and it's beautiful. It's really pretty. So until we have to deal with getting around in it, we can appreciate its beauty. So I wanted to launch our discussion this week of our Parsha by talking about the differences between learning and teaching. So what are the sort of differences that come to mind in those two different activities between being a student and learning, material versus being a teacher and needing to educate using that material? What differences come to mind, just sort of by association? Yeah, Janie, go ahead.
Janie,
So one of the things that I think about is that when you're teaching, you have to adapt to a number of different learning styles, and I think be more creative in terms of not just knowing the material to teach it, but to be able to present it in a way that the students can learn it.
Fantastic. We need to appreciate that the students are coming from different places, and the material needs to be presented differently to different students so they can absorb it, which forces the teacher to look at it from multiple angles. And that's fantastic. Heather, seasoned teacher, go ahead.
Well, the teacher is giving the information, the student is taking it in and needs to do a variety of thinking in order to internalize what it is that they are being taught. So while the teacher's job is to find a variety of different methods that will entice the students to learn and help them with their different learning styles, the student still has a job of their own which is to complete the act. And it's, it's not just letting the teacher teach. They have to actually, as I said, internalize it, think about it, make it their own.
Indeed. They can't be
One word.
passive. They
Yeah,
have
I
to be
think-
active in terms of their learning in order for it to be absorbed and internalized. Indeed. Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
I was going to say that a student at first glance it's a more passive activity where the teacher is more active. The teacher tries to get the student to interact, but the teacher was first a student and had to internalize the lessons. And as the teacher is teaching, they're listening to themselves to see how they understand the material, whereas the student is taking it in for the first time. So it's a little bit more passive, whereas the teacher has to be more active. They've taken in the material, they have to internalize it, and then they have to give it over.
Right. So we typically think about most teachers having been students and then becoming teachers. What I want to present this morning through our Parsha is a little bit of a different approach, which is learning by teaching. Not by being a student, but learning by teaching, based on the notion that if you want to learn better, become a teacher of that material. Now, you might technically need to be a student of the material so you can know it, but that's not enough to actually learn it, to really grasp information fully. Becoming a teacher of it forces you to grapple with it from so many different perspectives, and to ask questions and to interrogate it to see how that information lands with pupils so that you can, solidify it or recalculate it or refine it. So the way that our Parsha encourages the Jewish people to learn is to become teachers. So I'm going to share the source sheet and we'll see this pattern emerge together. Okay. So learning by teaching. So the opening scene of our Parsha has Hashem speaking to Moshe and saying the words, Bo el Paro. Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Bo el Paro. Now, in previous years, we've spoken a little bit about the language of Bo versus Lech. In some instances, like by Makat Dam, Hashem says, Lech el Paro, go to Paro. And in other cases, Hashem says, Bo el Paro, come to Paro. And it seems to go back and forth. Of course, Parshat Bo is named after this first verb, in the Parsha, the first sort of significant word, distinct word after Vayemer Hashem al Moshe. If it was the first word of every Parsha, then there would be a lot of Parshat Vayomers out there. But Parshat Bo is sort of focused on this first action of come to Paro. And what's the difference between go to Paro and come to Paro?
Come is much more welcoming.
Right, coming is an invitation.
Yes.
Right? That implies come with me. Right? There's sort of an implied accompaniment there. Whereas Lech is, you go on your own. You go ahead. You're on a hike together and there's a really, tough climb. If you say, you go ahead, it implies you going ahead without me and I'll catch up to you. Versus come with me is sort of like the, acharai kind of mentality of the Israeli army is, I'll go first and you come with me, you follow me, but I'll be, your shield and I'm going to go in first. So why is it that in some instances Hashem sort of is the bulldozer and says, I'll accompany you and I'll actually go in first, and other instances Hashem sends Moshe on his own? not fully on his own because he's really accompanied by Aaron. But we've discussed about those differences before, but I just wanted to flag it here. And there, the basic theory that we've shared in the past is there are some instances where Moshe is feeling a little bit lacking in confidence, and he needs to know that he's not going about this mission on his own. So the gesture of invitation is going to be more effective than the gesture of go out on your own. But moving along to the remainder of this pasuk, and the next one, which is where we're going to get back to the theme that I identified a moment ago, we read, Ki ani hichbarati et libo v'et lev avadav, because I have made heavy the heart of Paro and the heart of all of his attendants, right? So it's not just Paro whose heart is hardened, who we have to ask that theological question of, freedom of choice. We also have to ask it to his attendants who sort of supported his stubbornness and his refusal to see and accept, the reality of the plagues around him. It's hard for one single person to have that much obstinance, but if they have their posse, if they have a people around them who can egg them on, it becomes a little bit more feasible to stay, so stubborn for so long. So God sort of makes sure that the conditions are right for Paro to say, no, I will not let you go, over and over and over again. And what's the reason for this, causing of Paro's heart to be heavy with refusal and stubbornness? Lema'an shiti ototai ela bikirbo, to elongate the process of the redemption so that there are more fireworks, there are more flares, there are more signs that occur in Egyptian, in Egyptian territory, where the Jews and the Egyptians can bear witness to God's majesty. So, we sort of justify the means by the end, in this case, that the overall purpose of the hardening of Paro's heart is in order to create this longer process of redemption that has all of these miracles along the way. So far, that's really just introductory. And here in the next pasuk is where this introduction comes to play in terms of the student versus teacher. So what's the other reason? Not the other reason, but now that you understand why the redemption process is going to take a long time, we have to appreciate sort of the purpose of that elongated timeline. What's the value in stretching things out? If the purpose of hardening Paro's heart is to stretch things out, so why is that important? What's the import of that? So that's what the next pasuk comes to answer. Ulama'an tisaper ba'oznei bincha ubein bincha et asher hitalalti b'mitzrayim. Having a longer, more drawn-out process will give you more material to share. You'll be more able to spread in the ears of your children, your sons and your daughters, all of the things, asher hitalalti b'mitzrayim, all of the ways that I sort of teased or tormented or sort of played with. The English here is, made mockery of the Egyptians, right? All 10 of those plagues that we have so much fun with at the Pesach Seder, by recreating, right? That was the plan from the beginning, so that we would have lots of material to convey to our children. The et ototai, and all of this is the same language as the same word as the verse before, the wonders, asher samti bam, all of the the Choshech and the Arba and the Arav, all of these wonders, all of the miracles of the splitting of the sea, the closing of the sea, right? All of that is v'yadatem ki ani Hashem. It's to inculcate in you that I'm in charge, that there is one, omniscient, omnipotent power in the world, and that's me. So the entire process of the Exodus was engineered towards that end. That was the goal for the internalization of God's existence and his involvement in the world. So everything else serves that function. Now,
Rabbi,
just want to pose, yeah.
but our ancient rabbis put into our seders that we are to have compassion to the Egyptians, and we dip the 10 drops out of our goblet onto a plate. So it's almost counterintuitive. Well, it's sort of counterintuitive. Here God is displaying many miracles for the Jews / plagues for the Egyptians, and to show all that God is everything and can do anything and everything. Yet, on a human level, we have to have compassion for what is done to our enemy.
Yep, I think you answered your own question.
Yeah, I guess that's why. Yeah.
So in this context, though, we're not focusing on the Egyptians as the people who need to be convinced of God. That is a focus elsewhere, as is Paro. But here, the focus is more internal, right? The focus is on your children and your sons and your daughters. So the Mefarshim pick up on an inconsistency within this verse. I highlighted, or I should say bolded, this inconsistency so that it might pop out a little bit more. But let's appreciate the
Rabbi, can you raise the screen?
Yeah. Is that better?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So the verse reads that you should recount in the ears of your children all of the miracles that take place, so that you will know that I am God. We might have expected the verse to say that you should recount all of these miracles to your children so that your children will know that I am God, right? That the end of the verse would refer back to the object of the education, right? The listeners, if the purpose is to be able to teach our children, then the goal is for our children to be able to have that learning and to have that knowledge of God's existence. So instead of saying v'yadatem, it should say v'yedu, that they will know that I am God, because after telling them, then they will have that knowledge. So why is it that the Torah formulates it back to the parents who are teaching their children? So here's where we come back to the premise that I started with, which is that when someone learns something in order to teach it, that material is deepened to the extent that they then fully understand it and know it. Their thinking becomes more organized. They look for relationships between ideas and actively think about, the best way to communicate it. And so the time, has finally come for Bnei Israel to be freed from slavery. And Moshe gathers the people to deliver important instructions about rituals that they're going to perform, before and after they are redeemed. And he could have decried, the evils of slavery. Instead, what he does is he talks to parents about educating their children. And they are told that they need to become a nation of educators, right? Before even like becoming students, they have to become educators. So of course, in order to become educators, you have to learn the material yourself. Any good teacher, needs to be a student first, but being a student isn't enough to become a teacher. You need to become an excellent student in order to become a teacher, because you have to study the material over and over and in different ways, and really, as I said, interrogate it in order to master it so that then you can teach it. And then in the process of teaching it, you also learn new things about it because you get questions from students and you think differently about it. And then you have to synthesize the weaknesses that are raised by your students with the strengths of, the answers that you come up with, so that the material can cohere even better. And so what's alluded to in this pasuk here is that the Jewish people themselves will become more aware of God by teaching about God to their sons and daughters. Okay. Any responses or reactions? Does that idea like resonate in terms of like being able? It's not just for rabbis or for actual teachers, but this is a lesson in parenting, that to actually own any information, we need to be able to educate our children about it, and then we learn it differently. All right. If we're just reading a book for our own benefit, we're not going to think as critically about the information as we are if we're preparing to talk about it at the Shabbos table to our children, or to talk about it to our guests at the Shabbos table. When we prepare a presentation, we think much more deeply about the material in order to present it in a proper fashion. So I think we can all appreciate that we learn by the preparation of teaching and through the act of teaching itself. And that's why Moshe is telling the people, you don't have to be students, but you have to be teachers. Each of you as a parent has to be teachers of this experience, which is why I am slowing down the experience so that you can absorb it and internalize it to such an extent that you can convey it in a compelling way to your children going on, for generations to come.
But you said it's God that was slowing it down to make sure that everyone experiences and understands His majesty.
Yep.
So that's the crux of our Seder then, right? That's why thousands of years later, we're still teaching.
Right. And so it's an effective methodology because it stood the test of time.
Mm-hmm. True.
Right. This is still the cycle that happens at every Shabbos table, right? When Divrei Torah are shared, whether it's intergenerationally or among peers. And of course, as you alluded to, Janice, this magic, transpires every Pesach at the Seder table when families and friends come together to engage in this didactic process of teaching across generations. And there is teaching going on in both directions, but oftentimes what happens is, the kids ask such great questions that the parents have to go back and learn the material differently to present it in a more effective, more creative, more compelling fashion next time. Right? So there's this cycle of learning and teaching and learning through teaching.
True.
I
What?
Sorry, but I think there may be another little aspect in there, which is for Hashem to not convince, but the messaging to say, I'm telling you this because you have to know it's a truth. Because if somebody is not convinced of something, it's a little more challenging to pass it on and teach it. And for the other people who are trying to the recipient of that of this Torah, to be accepting if they're not convinced that that person teaching it is not convinced themselves about it.
That's a great point. Students can sniff out inauthenticity or insincerity very, very quickly. If teachers don't really believe in the material they're teaching, students pick up on the hypocrisy. I was always sort of told that your students have a hypocrisy detector.
Yeah.
And they will be able to smell you out if you're, not actually standing by what you're teaching. And so, indeed, I think that point, Jobert, is actually very much in keeping with the two steps in the psukim that we read, that God is stretching out the process so that we, can internalize God's presence in this world, and so that we can then teach it to our children.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first stage there is that sometimes if things happen quickly, we don't actually spend the time processing them, because we can sort of move on very quickly from things. But if things are drawn out and we have to wrestle with it for a longer period of time, it becomes a bigger part of us, right? The more time that we spend on an experience, the greater the experience is integrated into our hearts and minds and our souls. And so the Exodus process was very drawn out, not just for Paro to become a convert, not just for the Egyptian people to recognize God, but to remove, the slave mentality from the Jewish people so that they could trust in God. So it wasn't enough to see it once, they had to see it 10 times, and then again and again. Even that didn't fully work, but at least that gave, sort of a fighting chance for them to trust in God themselves. And then once they had that, they could, teach their children. But by teaching their children, they, they even deepened the knowledge. That's the Viadatem, is that you will actually know God better by going through the Sipur, by becoming transmitters of this and figuring out how to teach it in a relevant fashion.
Rabbi Cheses,
Yeah.
there's one very slight area that you just kind of go over, you bypass it, and it's bincha uven bincha. You have to teach your grandchildren also.
Yes. This is so critical. I'm glad you elevated that, Jill, that it's not enough to just think about it in terms of one generation. It needs to be multiple generations. This is, very much the thrust of Jewish continuity, that we need to be thinking about the education of our grandchildren while we are going through life, right? And this is in the middle of the plagues. The people are, have experienced only half of them, and Hashem is telling them, already get ready for how you're going to be conveying these experiences to your grandchildren. And that's an extremely Jewish ethic, right? Thinking about how we're about to experience something in a way that we can remember it and record it and internalize it so that we can tell our grandchildren about it.
Rabbi,
Right.
let me ask you a question. Is there any reference to teaching and education before these particular pasukim in the Torah?
This is really the first time in Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. There is no explicit mandate for teaching. This is the first time in our parsha where we see the mandate to become educators to children and grandchildren, and we see it multiple times. And so the Exodus narrative is the first time where we see, on a national sort of level, this requirement of education and teaching from, one parent to another, from one parent to a child.
I thought of one.
Yeah.
Yeah. When Moshe's mother was nursing him, she was infusing him with Jewish identity, Jewish history.
Right, but that's not a mandate for everybody to teach their children, right? I think that's what Danny was asking in terms of like there being a mitzvah of chinuch to children. That this is the first time that it's articulated, and I'll just underscore that point by showing 2 or 3 other examples in Parsha Bo where we see this articulated. In the next chapter, we see V'hayaki amra lechem b'nechem maha avodah hazot lachem. When your kids start asking questions to you about why you're doing the Korban Pesach, when they become inquisitive, don't shut down the question, but embrace it. V'amartam zevach pesach hu l'Hashem. This is the Paschal offering to God. Asher pasach al batei b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. That harkens back to the passing over of God in Egypt over the Jewish homes, B'nagapot Mitzrayim, when he afflicted the Egyptians with Makat Bechorot, V'at Batenu Hitzil, but he preserved, saved, rescued our homes, V'yikod ha'am v'yishtachu, and those who were there had tremendous awe of God and bowed for that, salvation. So when, you perform a ritual, and you sort of, invite questions, and then you're meant to answer those questions with great earnest and with seriousness by pointing back to events that happened in history. And it's sort of intriguing here in terms of, the starting point is you do the ritual without explaining it, and then if your kids ask why you're doing this, then you answer them. So this shows sort of a very progressive form of pedagogy, which is like sometimes you need to intrigue your children by doing things that don't make sense, and then teaching them using their curiosity as the energy behind the learning. All right, so oftentimes we do things that don't make apparent sense, and then we explain them so that they do. All right, that's a very classic form of pedagogy. A teacher walks into a room and draws a weird shape on the board, and the kids are like, what's going on here? And then the teacher says, this is the shape of the plot in, this chapter of Navi, right? And you draw them in with something. So similarly here with the Korban Pesach, the parents were meant to perform the ritual in front of their children without explaining what it was, but then expecting there to be questions that they then, address. And another articulation of that, which is the basis of the Haggadah in chapter Yud Gimel, the 13th chapter, is V'higadata lebincha, right? That's that crucial verb of to tell it over your children, to explain it in a multisensory way. Bayom Hahule Mor, to explain on the anniversary of Pesach every year. Ba'avor zeh Hashem asa Hashem li b'tzeiti Mitzrayim. It's because of what I experienced in Egypt that all of this, is important. And finally, the 4th articulation of chinuch, of educating our children, in our parsha is V'hayaki shalcha bincha machar lemor. When your children ask you tomorrow, ma zot, what is this? This is when the children are asking, why are you eating matzah? What's with all of this, maror? And then you respond to say that this is a commemoration of what transpired in history to me, and to my ancestors. And you're supposed to say it in the first person, right? Li, as opposed to, lahem. So this is a mandate for all of time that we're meant to teach our children as if we personally went through Egypt, and convey it to them with that kind of first person account. So to sort of encapsulate, this lesson, I found a nice quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who writes as follows, and this certainly resonates at a time of war in Israel right now, and we'll read it together. So to defend a land, you need an army, but to defend freedom, you need education. You need families and schools to ensure that your ideals are passed on to the next generation and never lost, or despaired of, or obscured. The citadels of liberty are homes of study. Its heroes are teachers. Its passion is education and the life of the mind. Moshe realized that a people achieves immortality, not by building temples or mausoleums, but by engraving their values on the hearts of their children, and they on theirs, and so on until the end of time.
Beautiful.
Nice.
And that is the pattern that emerges from our Parsha in terms of the Exodus being something that's already experienced in terms of how to teach about it, in terms of how to convey it in a way that it is engraved on our children's minds and hearts, and they on theirs, right? And so on until the end of time. And this is the, Moshe, really Hashem telling Moshe that this is the secret sauce to Jewish eternity, right? The buildings come and go. And so even though Moshe does, construct a Mishkan, right, that's not the first thing that he does in forming a nation and taking them out of Egypt. The first thing he does is to stress the centrality of teaching, of transmitting, of educating, right? That's the reinforced sort of mandate coming out of Egypt. This is all, muvan me'elav. This is all obvious to us, but it's important for us to appreciate where this comes from. We all experience this on a yearly, if not weekly basis with our own, children and grandchildren, but this comes from somewhere. And so as important as it is to have an army right now in Israel that's defending Jewish blood, the schools in Israel are equally as important because they are teaching why it's important to have an army and the importance of giving freedom to the Toshvei Haaretz, the citizens of the, of the state, so that they can go to bed at night without fear of harm. And so it's the houses of study that ultimately preserve our people, because by houses of study I don't just mean batei midrashim, but also the houses of study meaning our homes, where we transmit this from parent to child, and as Jill said, to grandchild. So this might feel like a pre-Pesach kind of Dvar Torah, but this is the Parsha. So I hope we can, appreciate that even if we're not, formal educators, we are all teachers. And the next time, we learn something, we should be thinking about how we can communicate it effectively to our children. Not only because we are a nation of educators, but because by teaching, we ourselves will learn more effectively.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining this week, and appreciate the discussion as always. And I wish everyone, at least in America, a safe and warm day. And looking forward to continuing next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.